I'm back, my beautiful people. Thank you all for tuning into the WAAR Room, where we provide the latest boxing news and analysis from my co host, Malissa Smith. She is an author and women's boxing historian, and Mr. Eddie Goldman. He's an award winning sports writer. We call him the conscious of combat sports. We are going to jump right into our Olympic coverage because there's a lot of controversial subjects going on. My primary subject, I think, is the rapist being allowed to compete. But we are going to kick it off to you, Eddie. Just explain to me, please, why this story about Imane Khelif, the Algerian boxer who made the Italian boxer quit in like 46 seconds. Why this
Oh boy.
story? Yeah, why is this story so important? What should people know about it?
There's so much to go into, so many different aspects to the story. But just before I get into the Olympics, I'm just going to make one very brief comment. Saturday night, while the Olympic boxing is starting to head to the medal rounds, professional boxing had two major cards, the biggest one being in LA, organized by Riyadh Season. And my comment is, fuck Turkey Al Sheikh and everybody behind that card, because they're organizing a major professional boxing card, a pay-per-view, to directly compete for eyeballs and money with amateur boxing, with Olympic boxing. That is utterly unacceptable and an absolute disgrace, coming from a country, by the way, which claims to want to organize Olympic events, which is having Olympic esports there, and wants to one day get a full-blown Olympic Games there. So that's my comment. So maybe in the future we'll talk about that card. I haven't completely caught up on it, but we're not going to talk about that. They can go fuck themselves for trying to another one sabotaging what's going on.
I
The
feel you
main
on that.
ones sabotaging this, though, in this case, are the Russians. The Russians, who most of whom have been not allowed to compete in the Olympics because numerous reasons. The support of the government and a lot of their athletes for the terrible war of aggression against Ukraine. The fact that RUSADA, the Russian anti-doping agency, is still not recognized by WADA, which has its own problems, and the fact that the Russian Olympic Committee is suspended because in the areas in Ukraine that are presently occupied by Russia, they try to recruit those athletes to be part of the Russian team rather than part of the Ukrainian team or the refugee team. So there are very few Russians allowed. I don't think there are any in boxing. I think in wrestling there's like one Russian in there, and very few Russians overall for that. Here's what, excuse me, here's what touched this off, and there's a lot more information coming out. And I talked about a lot of this stuff in my Patreon article. And please remember that these are amateur fights in the Olympics. With some exceptions, these are amateur fighters. So the style, the technique, the skill is not at the level of professional fighters. But what kicked this off was an opening round fight that took place. Let me just dig up the details about this. With Imane Khelif of Algeria, who was fighting an Italian fighter, Carini. And this was the round of 16 welterweight bout on August the 1st. Carini is a fighter that went into this with an amateur record, has never fought pro at 84-23 with 4 KOs. She's not a particularly good amateur fighter. She only has one world medal. She got a silver at the 2019 Worlds at super lightweight. She did fight in the Tokyo Olympics, but she lost in the quarterfinals in her only fight. Khelif is a fighter that has a little bit better record, and she did have one professional fight, although that was in November last year. And you know how they do in pro boxing? They put her against somebody with a 4-11 record. It was just a showcase fight, so Khelif won. But her record is 37-9 in amateur boxing. She has only 5 knockouts. And we'll get to the 4 no contests at the 2023 Worlds, where she won those fights, was headed to the finals. One of those victories was against an unbeaten Russia, Azalea Amenyeva, and that became a no contest. Whether that fight beating the Russian had anything to do with what happened afterwards is really not clear. Carini is also a fighter that has a history of quitting, and a lot of stuff was posted. Just really, I saw this stuff. We're recording this on Sunday, where she fought in the 2022 World Championship prelims. She was fighting Sermonelli of Turkey, who went on to win the World Championships. Although in this Olympics, she's been eliminated early on, so she will not get a medal. But Sermonelli was winning in 2022, and at the end of the first round in that fight, and a video has been put up just of the last part of that fight, Carini backs up, and all of a sudden, without a punch, without turning her ankle or anything, falls to the mat. She just falls down. So she's basically counted out. And that was the end of the fight, because she was losing to the Turkish fighter in Istanbul. And so she didn't want to fight anymore. She quit.
She's a quitter.
She's a quitter. So now the quitter this year is fighting in the Olympics against Khelif. And first she stops the fight early to supposedly adjust her headgear. Then she's fighting as a southpaw, Khelif in an orthodox stance. And there are a couple of punches thrown, nothing real definitive. And so Khelif throws a straight right hand that hits Carini in the face. There's no blood, at least at the time. It might have hit her in the nose. And there's no knockdown. She doesn't even look rocked. It was a strong punch. Carini calls time, walks over to her corner, raises her arm, indicates she's quitting, and it's over in 46 seconds. So she quits again in a major event that it looks like she wasn't going to win. There was no blood visible, but some reports said later that there was some blood on her shorts. But when I'm watching the replay, I just didn't see any blood. So if there was some blood, I don't know whether her nose was broken or what happened with that. But she quit. This is now interpreted by all kinds of lunatics and people that know shit about boxing, and the people that are just lying about this, as if she were decapitated, as if she was slaughtered in the ring and ended up being a bloody mess, something like one of those crazy blood matches in the like 1980s pro wrestling type things where they're blading. So you could watch that yourself. And people like Rowling, who wrote those silly Harry Potter books and all the other crap, that's saying, what a travesty, what an unfair advantage, because they find out that Khelif and also the Taiwanese fighter, Lin Yu-Ting, had been disqualified from the 23 World Championships last year, which were run by the IBA, supposedly for some vague test that showed they had XY chromosomes. And here's where it really gets crazy, because people all around the world there's such bigotry and stupidity and ignorance. They start reporting, oh, that Khelif and Lin, these are transgender fighters, which is an absolute lie. There was a pretty good article actually by the AP writer Greg Beecham that was picked up by all around the world, and the Boston Globe, which is supposed to be a respected paper, it's not the National Enquirer, ran a headline about a transgender fighter in the fight. Beecham never used the word transgender. Khelif is always identified as a woman that was on a birth certificate her entire life and never said she was transgender or anything like that. They just made this shit up. And then this kind of stuff was repeated by the idiots like on ESPN, Pat McAfee, and all kinds of people. Of course, Donald Trump gets involved saying he would never let a man fight a woman. All kinds of nonsense that's going on, all kinds of hatred and stupidity that we see in this. So then Carini basically got hysterical when she got punched in the nose. This is boxing. What do you expect to happen in boxing? So she all of a sudden realizes she's created an international firestorm, a huge controversy. So what does she do? She apologizes the next day and said she'd embrace her and all of this, but the damage had already been done. And the IBA, which had in the middle of the tournament, really right before the finals, disqualified Khelif. Khelif had won her semifinal match and was supposed to go into the finals. And Lin had lost her semifinal match, so she won a bronze. They have 2 bronzes in these events. So if you go to the semifinals and you lose in amateur boxing, you get a bronze. Both of their matches were disqualified. And then these vague stories start coming out about a letter the IBA sent to the IOC and about some vague tests which still have never been released, where although they did get sent to like a pro-Russian reporter, an American, Abrahamson, somehow he saw these tests. And there's a whole brouhaha about this thing, about this being unfair. Right now, there is not exactly any verifiable information about anything involving the gender of Khelif and Lin other than they are women.
So, Eddie, are you saying that there's no certifiable gender testing that shows they have XY chromosomes? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that you're innocent until proven guilty.
Okay.
And the only thing that's been put out there has been put out by the IBA. In fact, supposedly they're not releasing them publicly for confidentiality, but I don't even think the fighters have these tests. So if it's confidentiality, why don't the fighters have it? It's about them and their own bodies.
Exactly.
The IOC, Mark Adams, a spokesman, said at a press briefing that you can watch online that was held Sunday morning, where there were almost no other questions from the media except about this issue. It's become the main issue in the 2024 Paris Olympics. Those tests are not legitimate tests. The tests themselves, the process of the test, the ad hoc nature of the tests are not legitimate. The testing, the method of testing, the idea of testing, which happened kind of overnight, none of it is legitimate, and this does not deserve any response. So we don't know what tests were done, what was the protocol, the chain of command, what actually was tested, and perhaps more importantly, what is the significance of these particular tests? Because they claim that they showed that these fighters had XY chromosomes. And some of the media, particularly the bigots, are reporting that XY chromosomes mean automatically that somebody is male.
No, it doesn't.
And in most cases, that's true, but that's not. There are so many different variations, and I'm far from an expert in this. There's the XY complete gonadal dysgenesis, also known as Swyer syndrome, and there are others there. And even if they do, again, this is not verified by anything that can be verified. It's like these people that take these PED tests by some unknown or unverified source and say, "See, I'm clean." The VADA test or the WADA test isn't good because I was clean by this other test. Well, we don't know whether this is a legitimate test, and so the question then becomes, okay, if you have some variety in your chromosomes, what's the effect on your body? Does this give you a so-called unfair advantage? And this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because if you look at the record of fighters like Khelif, she's been beaten 9 times. She was beaten by Kelly Harrington, who's going for another gold medal this year. She was beaten at the Tokyo Olympics by that. She was beaten by Amy Broadhurst, another fighter who at that time was representing Ireland, and she's been beaten by other fighters. And the similar thing with Lin Yu-Ting. I don't know if you should watch Lin Yu-Ting's fight. You would think she was coming out looking like Hulk Hogan. In fact, every fighter that I've seen her fight, Lin Yu-Ting, while she's taller, is easily the leaner or skinnier of the two fighters. And you look at her arms, they're very, very lean. She's very quick. She's, for an amateur fighter, good at boxing, and she's been a 2-time world champion. But she's lost before in the Olympics. These are not killers. These are not fighters like, in the heyday of Mike Tyson or whoever you want to look at today as the big knockout artist, Gervonta Davis, or in the past like an Ann Wolfe or whoever. These are not big knockout artists. So even if this is true, which again I stress has not been proven scientifically and irrefutably, what's the advantage? Does it mean there's automatically an unfair advantage? And then you get into something a little more philosophical. What is an unfair advantage? Well, an unfair advantage, obviously, if the judges are fixing the fight, and we've seen a lot of terrible officiating during the Olympics. An unfair advantage if the judges are crooked or biased or completely incompetent, or if you take a PED. In other words, if your strength and your conditioning and all that is determined not by your natural genetics and your hard work and dedication and training, but by putting some of that stuff into your body and cheating, that's an unfair advantage. But is something an unfair advantage if you're born that way? Did Michael Phelps?
I think so. Michael Phelps competed against men. And I think that if a woman produces excessive amounts of testosterone, then if you're suffering with Swyer syndrome or hyperandrogenism, where your body, you do have the XY chromosome and you're producing massive amounts of testosterone, that is giving you an edge against women who don't have to take hormone suppressants to reduce the amount of testosterone in their system.
But is that unfair? Because it's pure
To me,
natural.
it's unfair. It's unfair that I should have to compete against a woman who's automatically has PEDs in her system naturally.
They're not
It's
PED.
testosterone is considered a performance enhancing drug if you take excessive amounts of it because it gives you an edge. So I believe that if a
That's
woman is producing massive amounts of testosterone, and she either has to meet Olympic criteria as a woman, has to take hormones to reduce the amount of testosterone, then I feel like she has an edge. And maybe XY people should compete against XY people. I don't know. This is a very tough subject, but and it's very complex because our bodies are very complex. However, I don't think that, initially I was reactionary, like a lot of people were reactionary, like, because when you look at Imane, she looks very masculine. She's got the body, the strength, and all of that. She's a good fighter. Apparently, all of these Olympic athletes are good fighters, but I just think that yes, it was blown out of proportion because everybody looked at her and automatically thought she was transgender and that she was in the ring. Go ahead, Melissa. What do you want to jump in here? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sorry, I was
No worries, babe.
trying to keep quiet so I wouldn't disturb anybody.
Right.
All right, so I want to tackle this in a few different ways, and I'm going to go a little out of sequence. And the first thing I'm going to address is what you just said, which is this whole issue of testosterone. In the past, there was a female runner, I believe it was a runner,
Caster Semenya, yeah.
Semenya, who had an overproduction of, who just naturally had more testosterone and had to take a suppressant in order to compete. Very controversial. And part of where we are now is the fact that there really is no definitive standard that the IOC has come up with. There had been certain standards, and I think we've had a show on this like a year and a half ago or so where we talked about trans athletes and how trans athletes manage their men who have transitioned to being female post-puberty, and how in the past they had to manage their testosterone in order to ensure that there was a level playing field. And that some of that has gone by the wayside by sort of this renewed thinking that IOC has come up with, which sort of kicks the can to the national federations or the overarching federations like the boxing federation or the swimming federation or cycling or racing, and they come up with their own standards, and it gets very, very, very confusing. Now, in terms of this situation, even before Imane Khelif fought, this was already blowing up. So everybody, the press, everybody was laying in wait for her first match. I got calls to appear. I was supposed to appear that morning on BBC to talk about it. And then my segment was pushed because of an issue of Israel and Hamas. So it was already there, and the press was laying in wait. And how this all came out, where this information came from about the alleged test in March of 2023, when when Khelif and Lin Yu-Ting were removed, were disqualified from the Worlds. How that information came out is unknown, but it was a blast.
Kremlev.
And the way that was blasted was, oh, they're XY, they're men. There was absolutely no nuance, no understanding at all. So that morning, everybody was like, that's a man, that's not a woman. You can't have a trans fighter, blah, 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 blah. So you had all of that. But now let's step back to what that March test was. We do not know why and what kind of test was given to these two fighters and whether everyone had to take it or only they did. So there's no transparency at all. The other thing is that the IBA's own rules, which were effective February 9th, 2023, made no reference whatsoever to defining what a woman is, to doing any testing. Zero, zilch, nada. Absolutely nothing. The only testing they talk about in those rules has to do with WADA testing, drug testing. That's it. So Why they were giving a test in March when their own rules did not allow it is another whole series of questions that need to be asked. The other thing is the only statement that was made that I have been able to find in my research was a statement by Kremlev saying, oh, they tested XY, they're men. You know,
he first said they were high in testosterone,
highest
and
testosterone.
then they walked that back, saying it wasn't a testosterone test.
Right, it was
so
chromosomes.
He's already lying and just contradicting himself.
So, and it wasn't until the fall in May, so like 6 weeks later, that they added new rules that suddenly said a woman is defined by having XX. Okay, but in the meantime, they had broken their own rules with these tests in March and DQ'd these two fighters. Now, someone listening may ask the question, well, why weren't these tests given for the Olympics? So let's go back a little bit.
Exactly.
In 2016 in Rio, there were a set of criteria and rules put in place on any kind of testing to establish WADA testing, drug testing, and what's a woman, what's a man, and what you had to show to prove you're a woman. That was in 2016. When we get to the 2020, delayed 2020 Olympics, by that point, IBA, which was the successor organization to AIBA, it's the same organization, they just rebranded themselves. And this is the organization that's now been taken over by the Russians in the form of Kremlev and all the funding coming from Gazprom. They were in such hot water with the IOC in terms of being able to prove that they had good governance, that they had financial controls in place, governance controls in place, and could prove satisfactorily that they could run the judging and refereeing and even the whole process of the trials fairly. They were sort of put on hold by the IOC, and the IOC took that over. And as part of that process of running the trials themselves, setting up all the referees and the judges and all of that, they took the same rules from 2016, and those were the rules for 2021. And we should state that both, Imane Khelif and Lin Yu-Ting were both fighting in the Olympics in 2021. Lin Yu-Ting lost her first round, and Imane Khelif lost in the second round to Kelly Harrington, who's this phenomenal boxer from Ireland, who went on to win the gold. Should add that this was at lightweight. This year, Imane Khelif is fighting at welter, which is bigger, higher weight. That's going from 132 to 147, which is probably a more natural weight for Khelif because she's tall.
She's tall.
Okay, but when she fought Kelly Harrington at the Olympic Games, she fought at lightweight. She lost in the second round. She went on to win competitions. She continued to fight. Now, she started fighting in 2018. And when Khelif started fighting in 2018 in the amateurs in Africa. And she had some losses, she had some wins, she had a very low ranking, and she has continued to work hard to represent Algeria. The other thing about her is this year, starting in January of 2024, she became a UNICEF ambassador, and she has a role with UNICEF, right? So this is a person that not only is really dedicated to her life as a fighter, but is also dedicated to pushing it forward, specifically sport for girls. So this has been a very important thing. Lin Yu-Ting started boxing in 2013, okay? So she started as a youth at 17, and then started to crossed over into boxing as an elite adult She finally made it into the Olympics, as I said, in 2021. Her record is 42 wins, 14 losses, 1 KO. Now, you tell me how that's some, super guy defeating all comers. It's not.
No, well, they don't punch like that they don't punch for knockouts in the amateurs, right?
Right. And the point is, both of these women have been long-term fighters. This is not just, hey, I'm a guy and I'm going to transition to being a woman. I've decided to box. No, these are two women who have made very concerted efforts to box. In the case of Yu-Ting Ling, their stories have been coming out from Taiwan talking about how her mother was an abused woman. And so she learned to box to defend her mom, so there's just a lot here.
Right.
That goes much deeper than the politics of trans and everything else. So as I said, we have the IBA that gave tests, that reported to have given tests to these two women
allegedly
at a time when they didn't even have those tests in their own rule book. We don't know what those tests are. There's one writer out there who has a piece published that talks.
Abramson.
Yeah, Abramson and
pro-Russian piece of shit who writes that the split between IOC and IBA was because IOC doesn't like Kremlev.
Yeah,
Lord.
That's what all the years of debate and discussion. That's how he sums it up. The guy is a Russian shill.
But beyond that, the point of the thing, though, that he states in his article is that he, quote, saw copies of the tests. Oh, come on. But I can't reveal them because, it's personal medical information, but I can write to you that I saw them. And yeah, they were XY. This is just erroneous. It is really, really dangerous for these two women. They were qualified to fight in the 2024 Olympics. This is not the time to litigate whether they belong there or not. You want to have this conversation, then it needs to be backed up by data. It needs to be backed up by a clear understanding of how we work with women who are athletes and they're the real complex issues of female hormones. And every woman has testosterone. We all have testosterone, just as men have estrogen. Okay, this is a complex system, and if we want to really have some kind of process for saying, okay, if you hit T here, you got to modify it, then we have to back that up with data. We have to back that up with the kind of science, good science, that can ensure that our athletes are safe. Both the athletes who are in a combat sport contesting potentially against someone who has real advantage just because of their hormonal setup,
exactly,
to keep those athletes safe, but also to keep the athletes safe who may have that situation and want to compete, and we don't want to make them sick because they have to take birth control pills or whatever that solution is. But this is not the time to have that conversation, and certainly not in the middle of the Olympics when it is so clearly wrapped up in politics and so clearly wrapped up in this kind of gotcha nonsense. And and here's my own personal little bugaboo, which is as if any of these people give a shit about women's boxing, right? Where the fuck were they in watching this sport? Why were they demanding it to be, in the mix on the main events and on the Peacock, and not just something you got to go to Peacock and then, go through 6,000 screens to find boxing, okay? Right. So this is bullshit. But the fact that these incredible athletes, every one of those athletes who has worked their asses off to get into this sport, is now being put under this added pressure, both in terms of having to make a statement, like Kelly Harrington making a statement, I'm not going to fight a man. Well, she never did fight a man. She fought a woman, and she defeated her 4 years ago, 3 years
Right.
ago. So that kind of pressure is unfair.
Yeah, I
So
think we should be pressuring the IOC to establish some fucking protocol already. We've been dealing with this for how many years?
exactly, you
They
can't.
sent it to the international federations on
Well,
Right.
that no,
aside
I
from kicking the can down the
Kicking the
road,
can. Yeah.
because they said you might have differences in different
In your
types of
sports.
sports.
Right.
In other words, if there's a sport where power and strength are crucial to it, you might want to have stricter standards than another sport where there's more based on skill and technique and things like that. But then it's just that to me is just a cop out.
I agree with you.
I just want to add also the question is what changed in 2023 that all of a sudden IBA decided to change their
Yeah,
rules
exactly.
midstream in the middle of a tournament when the tournament was almost over, by the
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
and to do this very suspect testing. Well, here you have to look at something broader that happened, and I talk about this in my Patreon article. What changed was that in February 2022, Russia began its war of aggression against Ukraine, and they began a complete crackdown on all forms of human rights within Russia, all dissent, everything that was going on. And in particular, they made the LGBTQ community a scapegoat for the West and for everything that was going on. And they began to pass very draconian laws in Russia. In December 22, Putin signed a law against so-called LGBTQ propaganda. It was illegal for anybody to promote same-sex relationships or anything that they say was non-heterosexual orientations as normal. That was now illegal even to advocate that. In addition, last November, the Supreme Court in Russia outlawed what it called the international LGBT movement, like there's some organization, some conspiracy out there, and they labeled it as extremist. In other words, on the same level as some terrorist type organization. And so what they began doing was closing down and raiding establishments, including bars and whatever, and publications that were frequented by LGBTQ people. They began a witch hunt on this, more censorship. And at the same time, because of all the problems I talked about earlier, they began to organize this so-called friendship games as a competitor to the Olympic Games. And who's playing a key role in organizing the friendship games in Russia is Kremlev, not just the boxing, but generally putting those together. But those are already falling apart because they were supposed to have the first one next month, but it's been postponed till some unspecified date in 2025. So in the midst of all this witch hunt that's going on, they turn their attention to boxing. And this is the context in which this whole situation developed, which means that not only is this just a Russian disinformation campaign, but this is a Russian op. This whole thing is a Russian op. Whatever truth there may not be in, and again, nothing has actually been proven and established fairly and scientifically. It's a Russian op to disrupt the Olympics and to promote their whole reactionary program. So that's what we're going with right here. That's the mess that we're in. And a lot of these suckers and idiots and collaborators in the Western media have, as we've been talking about, just spreading lies and misinformation being fed to them directly or indirectly by Russia.
Well, that's a sad state of affairs. I feel bad for those two fighters. And, I hope the IOC grows some balls and set some standards and protocols for future games in
Well,
2028.
yeah, and more
Yeah.
to the point, again, we need to have an appreciation that this isn't a political question. It's
Yeah.
which the IBA clearly, one of the issues and problems with their governance is that they're, completely in the enthrall of a political perspective. But this is science. This is understanding the medicine and
Right.
really approaching that from the health and safety of all the participants in the sport,
Yeah.
whether it's boxing or bicycling or swimming
Right.
or whatever else. And the hysteria that comes out is really over the top. I mean, I was glad that Angela Carini apologized. She really should have. I'm hoping it was genuine and not just her national federation going, girl, shut up and apologize. I hope it was genuine. And the Boston Globe put out a huge errata today, apologizing to everybody that read their terrible reporting story, and to Greg Meacham, who, by the way, is one of the good guys in boxing writing, and has always supported women in the sport, and apologized, naming him in particular because they completely mangled his reportage. So,
They did it for the clicks.
it did it for the clicks, which
Did
is
it for the
bullshit.
clicks.
And when you
Yeah.
got JD Vance and Trump again
J.K.
spouting
Rowling.
this lie
Yeah.
about men are boxing and
Right.
we just want, you want to see a woman beaten up by a man? I mean, give me a
Even
break.
Clarissa said that.
Where
Even
did
Clarissa said that.
yeah, but where are you, where is your support of the fact that you have like women and four women and four men representing USA boxing at the Olympics? There's no, hey, let's rah women in boxing.
Yeah.
There's none of that. There's
Yeah.
nobody who gives a damn.
I am for combat sports. I am still not in that camp where everybody should be able to compete, especially if you've got some stuff going on that gives you an edge, whether you're taking PEDs or whether you're just naturally born that way. That's just my opinion. So, I just, because look,
Understood.
yeah, it's just, we live in an exclusionary world. Even if I was a white man and wanted to fucking fly a jet plane, you know what? I had to have 20/20 vision. I don't have 20/20 vision. So it's like, some things you are going to be excluded
But
from.
but that see that's natural. I don't have 20/20 vision. My vision sucks. And even when I was in high school and wrestled, I had to take my glasses that everybody would kid me with Coke bottle glasses. I remember in high school one time I was sitting outside during a lunch hour, and we had these wooden tables we're sitting at, and I decided to focus the sun through my glasses, and I like was burning a little hole in the wooden the wooden table. I had to take those glasses off, obviously, when I was wrestling, and
Right,
that affected me. So, but
right.
I was just born that way, and so that was natural. That's what happens, and other people
But
have
it would
advantages
exclude
like
you,
that.
right? But it would exclude you from a lot of jobs that require 20/20 vision. Like you couldn't be,
Yes,
right? So that was my point. But anyway, we are going to wrap it up here, folks, because my girl Melissa has a hard stop today. But this has been a feisty conversation. I've learned a lot. I've had to, pull back on some of my commentary because I was a little reactionary. But anyway, this has been a fantastic conversation. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Melissa, we got to start with you, baby. I want you to tell the people where they can find you.
Oh, sure. I am at Girl Boxing Now on Twitter. A lot of my stuff is on Thread these days, and I've got Instagram. My website is Melissa Malissa Smith.com or girlboxing.org. And my new book, The Promise of Women's Boxing, is still doing well, and hope you can pick it up at Amazon or wherever you buy
Barnes and
books.
Noble, that's right. Support independent artists and our authors. All right, my boy, Mr. Eddie Goldman. Tell the people where they
I'm
can
still
find you.
on shitter at NHB News. That's where a lot of this discussion is taking place, along with a lot of the crap. So you got to be where the discussion is, and the other, unless Musk makes it impossible to stay there for too long. My Patreon, where I had a very long article a couple of days ago discussing this, and hopefully we'll have some follow-ups. Patreon.com/Eddie Goldman. Our website's eddiegoldman.com. And so again, support independent media where you have discussion of this, and we're definitely going to continue. And a shout out again to our friend, Melissa was on her show, Alva Johnson with Vibe Architects every Thursday night, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Radio Free Brooklyn. She always gives us a shout out, so we got to give her a shout out. And she's a big boxing fan, and she's very supportive of our work. And so
love that.
We like hers is a music show, but we got to help each other out.
That's right. We love that. Absolutely. What's up, Alva?
We love that, Alva Johnson. Yes.
We love Alva Johnson, girl. All right, folks. Well, look, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and the notification bell so you know when we drop another video. I am your fight goddess. You can find me on Instagram at Fight Goddess One, where I argue with stupid ass fools on Fight Hype on the Fight Hub. Instagram, they just keep coming at me, and I just keep blocking. But anyway, I'm also on the Shitta. We still call it the Shitta at Angry Afro Radio. So that's where you guys can find me. I'm also on Threads at Fight Goddess One. So thank you guys for tuning in. It's been real. Support your sports justice, independent media, because these are our experts. We get the insight and the expert analysis from them. And I'm here just to chop it up. So you guys, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Peace, love, and push-ups. Boom, boom, boom.